It's always an act of optimism to place anything made of glass in the vicinity of children. This was my thought as I set up our beautiful Advent candle display, placing it on a taller, more wobbly pedestal that placed these candles precisely at the eye level of a 5-year-old. Should I put this away when the kids come for choir practice, I wondered, and then thought, no, there is too much opportunity to teach with this little display of fragile candles. And so as we eased into Advent, the first thing I told my choir kids was, these candles have shades made of glass, so we look with our eyes. And as we practiced looking with our eyes, I told them the significance of the candles and of the Advent season. We light these candles for hope, for peace, for joy, and for love as we wait for Jesus. Some of them knew about Jesus, and a few even understood that he had something to do with Christmas. I was happy to affirm they were right. Christmas is the day when we celebrate Jesus being born, but I also wanted them to know that we are still waiting for Jesus to return someday, as he said he would. Immediately a hand shot up. What if Jesus comes back and no one realizes it? The insight of an 11-year-old. I wanted to reassure her that of course everyone will realize it when Jesus comes back, but then I thought about the first time he came. People had sat for so long in darkness and despair that it was hard for them to recognize the light, and even when they didn't necessarily trust what they were seeing. Was Jesus for real? How did he do what he did, and why didn't he do more? When the Savior of the world finally showed up, everyone had something on their wish list, but not everything aligned with Jesus' mission. As a result, some people were feeling disappointed. Shockingly, John the Baptist was one of them. Yes, John the Baptist, the John the Baptist, who had dedicated his life to preparing the way of the Lord. John was Jesus' cousin, just a few months older than him. John probably knew Jesus as well as anyone could have, and he had even had the honor of baptizing his amazing cousin. John had set the stage for Jesus' public ministry, preparing people to receive him as the Messiah, the chosen one sent by God. Then John was thrown into prison by King Herod for the crime of criticizing the king's morally questionable marriage to his brother's wife. Never tell a man in power how to manage his love life, or anything really. It's hard to be a prophet, compelled to speak truth, even to the powerful. So that's how John got himself into that darkest of all places, a prison cell, and probably not a comfy one with 3 hots and a cot. This was a windowless cell where he would spend what was left of his life, and from that dark place, doubt began to creep in. From the 11th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, we hear John's uncertainty. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly, I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." That least in the kingdom of heaven was Jesus, of course, who would lower himself to be the servant of all, paradoxically becoming greater than all, certainly greater than the messenger who had announced his arrival. Even so, Jesus declared John the Baptist to be the greatest of all who had ever been born. And this right after John had questioned him. What a testament to Jesus' love and respect for John, that he could still hold him up as the standard of human greatness, even after John had sent someone to ask, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" There's so much grace here. Jesus understood where John was coming from. Desperate, lonely, condemned to die in a dank prison? Was that what John had signed up for? His job had been to prepare the way of the Lord, setting things in order so that they could begin the celebration of a new age. when every injustice of the world would be corrected, and people would finally walk along the path of God's will for all creation. That was the plan. But there John sat, rotting away in prison, wondering, did I miss something here? When would the good stuff start happening? From his prison cell, he had heard about other people's joy in Jesus' healing work. When would he feel joy? Had he perhaps been mistaken? Was Jesus actually going to save the world? And if so, might he think to include good old cousin John in the saving? Was that asking too much of a Messiah? Or had John been talking up the wrong guy? You cannot blame him for wondering, and neither did Jesus. There was absolutely no shame directed at John for asking if Jesus was the one. But neither did Jesus answer directly, yeah, I'm the one. He simply told the messengers, go and tell John what you hear and see. And then he listed the accomplishments. People have been healed, the blind, the mobility challenged, the diseased, the deaf, even those believed to be dead, and the poor have received good news. Blessed is anyone who takes no offense at the one who had done this work, concluded Jesus' message to John. Could anyone have been offended by Jesus' work? I suppose, if what they were expecting was a Messiah who would make their nation strong again and mobilize them to overthrow Rome. Jesus wasn't doing a single thing about that, was he? He wasn't even organizing a little posse to go bust John out of prison, and if he couldn't even stand up to a few very bribable prison guards, how would he ever stand up to King Herod, not to mention the men who pulled his strings? What kind of a Messiah was he? It's a fair question to ask from a dark, cold prison cell. John was experiencing a crisis of identity and purpose that have clouded the hearts and minds of many an activist. When your work seems to have landed you nowhere and the change you have been striving for seems to be happening slowly or not at all, you wonder, have I put my trust in the right thing? Into the hands of the messengers, Jesus placed some lights that they might be carried back to illuminate John's darkness. See, John, joy is coming to the world if you know where to look. See how people's lives are being transformed as the broken are made whole and the marginalized are brought back in. It is the work of joy, God's own joy at the restoration of the created order. The thing is, it's slow work, one healed person at a time, but does that make it any less significant? Well, it could seem that way for those who didn't assign great value to the lives of those whom Jesus had healed. Those people weren't rich or famous, bold or beautiful. Their lives were insignificant by the standards of their world, yet those were precisely the people Jesus worked with, and each changed life was a tiny glimmer of light in the darkness, so small but real. And that's what Jesus needed John to know, even from the depths of despair. This was the real thing. This was the way John had prepared for him, for all of us, the holy way of God. John wouldn't walk it with them anymore, but he had contributed richly to something that was bringing actual hope, peace, and joy into the world. Jesus blessed John for not being offended by this work, even though he would not live to see it completed. His part was finished. Not sure if Jesus' message was very comforting to John the Baptist. I'm not sure if John fully understood the direction that Jesus' way was going to go, how it would veer so dramatically from John's life as he himself slipped into oblivion, and only a couple of his most faithful friends even dared to visit him. It must have been painful to think that it was over for him, and yet he had done all that he could. John the Baptist had not personally saved the world. He had neither lowered the mountains of privilege nor raised the valleys of poverty so that the world would be a just and equitable place for all. He would die before these things could be accomplished. Let's be honest, we are still waiting for these things to be accomplished. But John could at least die knowing that he had done his part. He had used his gift to proclaim, to inspire, to gather crowds of people, and then direct their attention at Jesus. I hope that John, even from prison, could feel some joy, knowing that he had participated in a movement that would change the world. He might have wanted it to change a little faster, don't we all? But at least he did something. As Jesus pointed out to the crowds, John the Baptist was a prophet, not a powerful ruler dressed in finery. Maybe if he had been seated on a throne, he could have made bigger changes, but that was not his reality. What he had, he used. His bold voice, his brave truth. As a prophet, he told the story he knew as convincingly as he could to as many people as would listen. The story would continue long after his light had been extinguished. But that's how it is, isn't it? The magnitude of the work and the reality of our human limitations need not discourage us from participating even joyfully in the healing and transformation of the world. Jesus calls us even today to do that. We're all called to different kinds of work. Some are healers who do not shy away from the reality of physical suffering. Then there are nurturers caring for the young, the old, the impaired. Some raise a quick hand when food is involved. Others show up with tools to mend and build. Some care for the land or the sea or the air, while others advocate for the creatures whose very existence is at stake. Some speak out against oppression or quiet their own voices and listen to the stories of the oppressed. Some stand up for justice, while others sit down to protest injustice. And because of the magnitude of these problems, many workers eventually begin to wonder, is there a purpose to our work? Are we even getting anywhere? But even in the midst of dark and despairing thoughts, we can recall the voice of Jesus saying, remember the progress that has been made. It might seem like little, but every little bit counts. I recently listened to an interview with Jane Fonda, a woman who for 6 decades has worked at changing the world. In her 85 years on the planet, she has protested war, advocated for the rights of anyone you could think of, and is currently focusing on climate justice. While she is every bit the hero, she was honest about her fear, the fear that has stopped many a would-be activist from trying. She said, I realize I will not succeed at stopping climate change, but I will go to my grave knowing that I did everything I could. Even when things look bleak, we can find joy in knowing we did everything we could. John the Baptist, realizing that he would never see Jesus' sunlit path from his prison cell, might have found comfort in the same thought. I've done everything I could. I hope that this knowledge illuminated the darkness of his cell. John might have been disappointed in himself, in the world, maybe even in God. Sometimes we are. But how do we measure success? Problem solved, all of them forever? Or do we hold our little candles up to the small triumphs, the minor miracles, the homespun acts of mercy and grace, and celebrate even the little things with great joy? What more can we do as we journey on the very long road, the holy highway, the way of Jesus, the path whose end we cannot see, trusting that it will lead us closer to the kingdom of heaven, which is both in our midst and yet to come? To my young friend's question, what if Jesus comes back and no one realizes? I'm still thinking about my answer. I suppose it is possible that we will fail to recognize Jesus at his return, but my hope is that when he comes, humanity as a whole will be so in sync with his footsteps that we will not fail to recognize their cadence as they touch the earth once again. I can only imagine the joy when that happens, when the weak are made strong, when the light does overcome the darkness, when love wins every time. But until this is so, may our lives and our actions point to Jesus, lighting the path that leads to joy for the whole world, like this.